Welcome to our deep dive into the Roaring Twenties. This decade is still so captivating,
Oh, it is.
isn't it? And the sources you send in,
Ew.
these vintage photos,
Mhm.
presentation notes,
Yeah.
they're like a time machine. We're about to uncover a decade full of energy
Oh, yeah.
and innovation,
Uh-huh.
but also anxiety and contradictions.
Definitely a lot of that.
It's a fascinating mix.
Yeah, it's almost like
Uh,
stepping out of a dark tunnel, right? Like imagine the world's just staggered out of World War I. You've got this massive loss,
Mm.
disillusionment,
Yeah.
and then suddenly, bam,
Yeah.
a burst of energy, creativity,
Right,
and
yeah.
cultural upheaval.
You mentioned the photos.
Right?
And I have to say, some of these images of flappers you sent
Mhm.
are amazing. It really captures that sense of rebellion.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to imagine that just a few years before the world was in such a dark place.
Yeah.
The sources paint a pretty stark picture of post-WWI.
Mhm.
We're talking unprecedented casualties.
Right.
Destruction.
Mhm.
Soldiers coming home with not only physical wounds, but also psychological trauma.
The lost generation, they were called.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the physical and emotional scars.
Oh, right.
Think about the Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah.
Instead of offering a path to healing,
Right.
it left many feeling betrayed, like
Uh-huh.
the sacrifices of the war were meaningless.
Yeah.
That's a heavy burden to carry.
Okay, so you've got this backdrop of disillusionment,
Yeah,
cynicism even then,
yeah,
almost as if society couldn't bear the weight of it all anymore.
right.
Boom.
Yeah.
The Roaring Twenties explodes onto the scene. It's this incredible surge of economic growth, cultural experimentation.
Yeah.
Like society's hitting the fast forward button.
It's a fascinating reaction to trauma, isn't it? Almost
Yeah.
like after staring into the abyss, people were desperate for joy,
Right.
escape, anything, to feel alive again.
Yeah.
And that energy fueled the decade's innovations.
Yeah.
You can see it in your sources.
Wow.
The rise of the automobile being a prime example.
Yeah.
Henry Ford's assembly line back in 1913
Okay.
starts making cars affordable,
Right.
not just for the wealthy anymore.
You included an article on the impact of the automobile.
Right?
And it's amazing how much it changed.
Yeah.
It wasn't just transportation.
Right.
It transformed dating,
Yeah.
family life,
Uh-huh.
even how cities were planned.
Yeah.
Suddenly you could escape the city,
Yep.
go on road trips.
Mm-hmm.
The world was opening up.
And that sense of possibility was amplified by other technological advancements.
Yeah.
Electricity was becoming more widespread,
Right?
powering homes and factories.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine life before electric lights?
Yeah.
The change was incredible. It
Yeah.
wasn't just convenience.
Yeah.
It fueled industries, extended work hours,
Oh, wow.
changed the very rhythm of life.
And then you have the radio. This was more than just entertainment.
Oh, definitely.
We take it for granted now.
Right.
But having news and sports brought into your home,
Mm-hmm.
hearing those voices,
Yeah.
experiencing events along with the rest of the nation,
Right.
that created a shared national experience unlike anything before.
Exactly.
It's like the world was shrinking,
Yeah.
becoming more connected.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, this is the era of jazz music exploding onto the scene.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just a genre, it was a
Right.
cultural statement.
Yeah.
Born out of the African-American experience in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Jazz represented this incredible fusion of energy,
Mm-hmm.
improvisation, and raw emotion.
Right.
It was a perfect reflection of the times,
Yeah.
breaking with tradition,
Uh-huh.
embracing the moment,
Yeah.
seeking release in the face of uncertainty.
It's interesting how all these threads weave together, isn't it?
It really is.
The post-war,
Mm.
yearning for escape,
Yeah.
the explosion of technology,
Mm.
and this new music that captured the frenetic energy of the times.
Mhm.
It all comes together in this potent mix that we call the Roaring Twenties.
Exactly. But it's crucial to remember that this roaring was also built on some shaky foundations.
Oh, really?
While your sources showcase this dazzling era of innovation and cultural change,
Right.
they also hint at a darker side.
Okay.
Not everyone was enjoying this newfound prosperity.
Right. The prosperity wasn't shared equally.
Exactly.
You've got farmers struggling,
Uh.
workers being left behind as industries rapidly change.
Yeah.
And even for those enjoying the boom,
Right.
there was this underlying tension,
Yeah.
a sense that maybe it was all too good to be true.
Like dancing on the edge of a volcano.
Oh, wow.
The economic growth was fueled by speculation.
Oh, I see.
easy credit,
Right.
and a belief that the good times would never end.
Yeah.
But under the surface,
Uh-huh.
the seeds of the Great Depression were already being sown.
Wow.
The Roaring Twenties was a decade of contrasts, and understanding those tensions is key to unlocking its true legacy.
Okay, we've set the stage with this post-war disillusionment, leading to this incredible explosion of energy and innovation.
Yeah.
We've touched on the tech and even a bit of the cultural shifts.
Right.
But in your notes, you specifically mentioned wanting to explore the social side of things.
Yeah.
So let's dive into how these massive changes were affecting people's lives.
Okay.
And I think the best place to start is with the 19th Amendment,
Yeah.
finally granting women the right to vote in 1920.
Absolutely a big deal.
It's impossible to talk about the Roaring Twenties without understanding this monumental shift in gender roles.
Absolutely.
This was a culmination of decades of activism, and it set the stage for a wave of social change.
Right.
Women weren't just gaining political power.
Yeah.
They were challenging traditional expectations in every aspect of life.
Exactly.
And that's where the flappers come in, right? These photos you sent,
Yeah.
they're iconic.
Totally.
The bobbed hair, the short skirts,
Yeah.
the rejection of corsets.
Right.
It was a visual representation of this newfound freedom and a direct challenge to the older generation.
It was about more than just fashion.
Oh.
Flappers embraced new freedoms,
Yeah.
went to jazz clubs,
Wow.
danced, drank, smoked.
Wow.
They were redefining womanhood for a new era.
Yeah.
And for many, it was also a reaction to the horrors of the war.
Okay.
After witnessing such loss and destruction,
Right.
there was a sense of life is short.
Yeah.
Let's enjoy it.
And you can't talk about flappers without talking about jazz. It wasn't just music.
Oh, no.
It was a cultural phenomenon.
Absolutely.
That improvisation,
Yeah.
the energy, the syncopated rhythms.
Right.
It was all about breaking free from the rigid structures of the past.
It's fascinating how jazz, born out of the African-American experience, became the soundtrack of this era of change.
Yeah.
It embodied the spirit of rebellion, the desire for self-expression,
Right.
and the yearning for something new and exciting.
And it wasn't just confined to clubs.
Right.
Remember we talked about the radio. It was spreading jazz across the nation, creating a shared experience,
Well, exactly.
breaking down barriers between communities.
Absolutely. And radio wasn't just broadcasting music.
Right.
It was also introducing a new force.
What's that?
Advertising.
Oh.
Suddenly, you had companies using this powerful medium to sell products,
Oh, wow.
influence fashion,
Yeah.
and shape popular culture.
Uh-huh.
It's the beginning of mass consumerism,
Okay.
another key aspect of the Roaring Twenties.
So we've got this incredible tapestry of social and technological change happening simultaneously.
Yeah,
But before we dive deeper into the cultural side,
right.
there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to add: prohibition.
Yeah,
It's hard to imagine now,
I know.
but in 1920, the U.S. actually banned the manufacture's sale and transportation of alcohol. They thought it would solve all sorts of social problems.
It was a bold experiment in social engineering.
Yeah.
But it had some pretty dramatic unintended consequences.
I'll say. Instead of curbing drinking,
Yeah.
it fueled this whole underground culture of speakeasies,
Right.
bootleggers, and organized crime.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a paradox.
It's a classic case of trying to legislate morality
Oh, wow.
and ending up with something far more complex and unpredictable. And that's something that really defines the Roaring Twenties. A constant push and pull between progress and backlash, between attempts to control and the desire to break free.
I see.
It's a tension that makes this era so endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah. It's a reminder that human behavior is rarely a simple equation. You can't just outlaw something and expect it to vanish. Often it just pushes things underground, creates new problems, and sometimes even fuels a backlash, which makes you wonder, what parallels can we draw to today? I mean, are there any social issues we're dealing with now where we're seeing similar patterns?
That's a question worth pondering. But before we get too far afield, let's loop back to a key aspect of the Roaring Twenties that you were curious about: the cultural shifts. We've touched on flappers, jazz, and the radio, but there's another layer here. Something your sources mention, but don't explore in detail.
You're talking about the Harlem Renaissance, right? This was such a vital part of the era. And it's interesting how it unfolded alongside all these other changes. It wasn't just happening in isolation. It was feeding into and being influenced by the broader social and technological shifts.
Absolutely. The Harlem Renaissance was this explosion of creativity, art, literature, music, intellectual thought, all centered in Harlem, New York City. It was a period where Black artists, writers, and musicians were challenging racial stereotypes, celebrating Black identity and demanding recognition on their own terms.
And it's important to remember that this was happening during a time of intense racial discrimination and segregation.
Yeah.
The Harlem Renaissance was more than just artistic expression. It was a social and political movement.
Exactly. Think about figures like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong. They weren't just creating art, they were shaping a new cultural landscape, challenging societal norms, and demanding that Black voices be heard.
And their impact was profound. The Harlem Renaissance helped pave the way for the civil rights movement and continues to inspire artists and activists today.
It's also interesting to think about how the rise of jazz was intertwined with the Harlem Renaissance jazz clubs, became these vibrant spaces where people from all walks of life could come together and experience this new, electrifying music.
And the radio played a crucial role in spreading that music to a wider audience. It was a powerful force for cultural exchange and breaking down barriers.
It's fascinating how technology can both reflect and shape cultural shifts. In the Roaring Twenties, we see this with the radio, the automobile, even the mass production of consumer goods. They all contributed to a sense of acceleration, of the world getting smaller, of traditional boundaries being challenged.
And that sense of acceleration, that feeling that everything was changing at a dizzying pace, probably contributed to both the excitement and the anxiety of the era.
Absolutely. It's that push and pull that makes this decade so compelling. You have this explosion of creativity and innovation, but also this underlying sense of unease, a feeling that things were moving too fast, that the old ways were crumbling.
It's almost like a collective case of whiplash.
Yeah.
Society went through this massive trauma with World War I, then got jolted into this new era of technology, social change, and cultural upheavals. No wonder there was a sense of both exhilaration and trepidation.
And that duality is reflected in the literature of the time. F. Scott Fitzgerald captured it brilliantly in novels like The Great Gatsby. He wrote about the allure and the emptiness of the American dream, the thrill and the danger of excess, the joy and the sorrow of a generation caught between the past and the future.
And speaking of the future, we can't forget that the Roaring Twenties ultimately ended with a crash, literally. The stock market crash of 1929 brought the party to a screeching halt and ushered in the Great Depression.
It's a stark reminder that even periods of great prosperity can be built on shaky foundations. The unchecked speculation, the easy credit, the belief that the good times would never end, it all came crashing down.
It's a cautionary tale, isn't it? A reminder that economic booms are cyclical and that unchecked growth can lead to instability and hardship.
And yet, even in the face of such a devastating event, the human spirit endured. People found ways to cope, to rebuild, to adapt. The Roaring Twenties may have ended abruptly, but its legacy lived on.
And that's what's so inspiring about this era. Despite the challenges, despite the contradictions, there was this underlying sense of resilience, a belief in the possibility of progress, a willingness to embrace the new and the unknown.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope, always the potential for innovation, and always the enduring power of the human spirit.
So as we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive, I'm curious, what stands out to you most about the Roaring Twenties so far? What's resonating with you from all this information and these incredible sources you've shared with us?
For me, it's the interplay between individual lives and the larger forces of history. We often talk about decades in broad strokes, but the Roaring Twenties reminds us that history is ultimately made up of millions of individual stories, each one shaped by and shaping the world around them.
That's a great point. It's easy to get lost in the big events and cultural trends, but it's the individual stories, the personal struggles and triumphs that truly bring history to life.
And those stories are often full of contradictions, just like the era itself. You have people striving for progress and clinging to tradition, embracing change and fearing the future, seeking both escape and meaning. It's that complexity that makes the Roaring Twenties so endlessly fascinating. It's like we're piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? We've got all these pieces: technology, economics, social change, art, politics, and they all fit together to create this complex and captivating picture of the Roaring Twenties.
And it's a puzzle that's still relevant today. As we've been talking, I keep thinking about the parallels to our own time. We're living through a period of rapid technological change,
Right.
social upheaval, and economic uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're experiencing our own version of the Roaring Twenties, just with different technology and different challenges.
That's a great observation, and it raises an important question. What can we learn from the Roaring Twenties? What wisdom can we glean from this era of both progress and excess,
Yeah.
of liberation and backlash?
One thing that strikes me is the importance of balance.
Mm-hmm.
The Roaring Twenties was a time of incredible innovation and economic growth.
Yeah.
But it was also a time of inequality and social unrest.
Right.
It's a reminder that progress without equity can be unsustainable
Uh-huh.
and ultimately lead to instability.
That's a crucial point, and it's something we need to keep in mind today as we navigate our own era of rapid change. We need to ensure that the benefits of progress are shared widely,
Right.
and that we address the underlying social and economic issues that can lead to division and unrest.
Another lesson we can learn from the Roaring Twenties is the power of individual action.
Yeah.
Despite the challenges they faced, the people of this era weren't passive bystanders.
Right.
They were actively shaping their world, whether through political activism,
Mm-hmm.
artistic expression,
Yeah.
or simply by embracing new ways of living.
Absolutely. The flappers, the jazz musicians,
Right.
writers, the entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
they were all pushing boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
challenging norms,
Yeah.
and creating a new reality. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming forces,
Right.
individuals have the power to make a difference.
And speaking of individuals,
Mm-hmm.
I have to say I'm really impressed by the sources you chose for this deep dive.
Oh, thanks.
These Phaedos articles and notes,
Mhm.
they're not just dry historical documents.
Right.
They're windows into the lives of real people who lived through this extraordinary decade. They capture the energy,
Yeah.
the excitement, the anxieties,
Right.
the contradictions,
Yeah.
all the things that make the Roaring Twenties so endlessly fascinating.
You're right. These sources remind us that history is not just about dates and events, but about the human stories that unfold within those contexts.
Yeah.
And it's those stories, those individual experiences that
Yeah.
help us connect with the past and understand its relevance to our own lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave you with this thought.
Yeah.
What story from the Roaring Twenties resonates with you the most? What aspect of this era speaks to your own experiences, your own values,
Right,
your
yeah.
own hopes and dreams?
It's a great question, and I think it's one that each listener will answer in their own way. But for me, the enduring lesson of the Roaring Twenties is the power of human resilience.
Yeah.
Despite the challenges, the setbacks, the
Yeah.
uncertainties,
Yeah.
people found a way to adapt,
Oh,
to
yeah.
innovate,
Right.
to create, to find joy, and to build a new future.
It's a reminder that even in the most turbulent of times, the human spirit endures,
Absolutely.
and that no matter what challenges we face, we have the capacity to learn, to grow,
Yeah.
and to create a better world for ourselves and for future generations.
Beautifully said. And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point. There's so much more to explore about this fascinating era, so keep learning,
Yeah.
keep questioning,
Yeah.
and keep connecting the dots between the past and the present.
Because as we've seen, the Roaring Twenties is more than just a chapter in a history book.
Oh.
It's a reflection of ourselves, our aspirations, our struggles,
Right.
and our enduring capacity for resilience and reinvention.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep diving deep.